entire community, I welcome you and extend greetings from our city. It's indeed a pleasure to host this event of such importance and promise. For years, our educational system has operated on a two-track approach, training students for college and training them for a job. This seems to have served the needs of the past, but this is the present. And we are educating today's students for tomorrow's challenges. Past practices will no longer prepare our young people for the very and intense competition of the global market. If we are to induce change, then we must induce new methodology. We must be innovative. We must be bold. We must be visionary. That's why I am so pleased and excited to be a part of this new approach, this new blending of vocational and scholastic training, which has produced the academic tech concept. We gather here today to learn more about that concept and together, as a total community, transform that concept into reality for our boys and girls. We welcome all participants in this endeavor, the Peninsula Public Schools Divisions, Thomas Nelson Community College, the Virginia Peninsula Chamber of Commerce, and our business and industrial communities. Together, with our minds and our best efforts, I'm confident we can not only rise to the challenge, but we can lead our young people into the 21st century. We welcome you again to our city, and we hope you have a pleasant and enjoyable visit with us this morning. Thank you.
I'd like to also bring greetings this morning, and I have the privilege of introducing to you the head table and the other dignitaries we have here today. Starting on my far right, Ned Schwartz, Tech Prep Coordinator, Virginia Community College System. Next to him, Dr. Carlisle Ramsey, Assistant Vice Chancellor of Virginia Community College System. Then Mr. Jerry Hicks, Principal Specialist, VocEd, State Department of Education. Next, Dr. Bob Templin, Thomas Nelson Community College. And then Mr. George Perry will be our speaker this morning from Vice President General Manager of Siemens Automotive. Then starting down on my far left, Mr. Al Tompkins, who's the Chairman of the Virginia Peninsula Chamber of Commerce. Next to him, Dr. Gaten Caruth, and she is the Superintendent in charge of New Horizons Technical Center, and so she's representing the superintendents today. You already met Mr. Ray Washington, and you'll meet Dr. Billy Kennedy in a few minutes, who will be, he's the Assistant Superintendent in Hampton, and he'll be bringing some remarks on behalf of the Executive Committee. Some of you are probably sitting out there, and I've gotten a couple of calls from some of our teachers saying, why am I here? And it's important for you probably to know, and for the head table to know, who is represented here today. Because you are not here by accident, you are here by design. And I'd like for you to know who is here. So we'll start with the people that are most important to this process, and that's the teachers and administrators, the building-based people. So we'd like you just to see who is here. If you are from York County schools and you're a teacher or a building-based administrator, will you stand so people can see where you are? Teachers from York County schools. Okay. If you're a teacher or a building-based administrator from the Hampton school system, would you stand, please? James City County and a building-based teacher. Would you stand, please? Administrators. And now, Pocosin schools. Would you stand, please? And Newport News Public Schools. Would you stand, please? We also have representatives here from New Horizons Technical Center. Would you stand? I know there are some here. Yes. Another partner in this effort is Thomas Nelson Community College, and they have some faculty, administrative staff here. Would you stand if you're from Thomas Nelson Community College? think you can see that the predominance of the audience here are instructional personnel, and people who have an interest in educating and a vested interest on a daily basis of educating our young people. So like I said, this was no accident that you're here. You'll be finding a little bit more out as the meeting goes on this morning about what your role in this project will be, but we welcome you. There's some other folks here today, however, who provide the support and the basis for this effort to continue. These are the people who help us shape policy and make policy for the schools. And this is our school boards from the jurisdictions that participate. So if you're a school board member and you're here, would you please stand? From any of the 5 school boards. We also have representatives here from the business and industry community because, again, this is a partnership, and if we're going to bring together the needs of the workforce and for the people who could go out and be educated to enter into the workforce with technical training, we need to have input from that sector. So if you're representing any of the business and industry sector, would you stand today so we can see where you are? And we've recognized a couple of the superintendents who are up here at the table, but I see, let's see, the other superintendents, Ray, back there, Renal, back here, Steve Staples, there he is there, who did we miss? Dr. Lett, hey, I can't miss him. Just kidding. We also have some other folks that make this whole process work, and these are our legislators and our local city council persons. So if you're here and you're representing a political body, the city council, the General Assembly, would you please stand so we can see where you are? Okay. Now, this project is being conducted by an executive committee made up of educators and business persons, and it's chaired by one of the persons, I guess, who was instrumental in writing the grant initially, and we'd like to recognize Cecil Phillips, who's the director of this project. So where's Cecil? There he is. Now, if you don't like what you hear today, the next group that I'd like to stand up is somebody you need to grab from your school division and say, hey, I've got a suggestion for you. And this is the executive council, the executive committee for this project. If you like what you hear today, grab them too and say, hey, you've done a good job and let's continue. But if you're on the executive committee that's going to be working over the next 3 years with this project, would you please stand? Some teachers, some administrators, please stand so you can see. Look around and find who's from your division. These persons, many of them assistant superintendents, many of them teachers, and other folks. Thank you. This group would be people for you to get in touch with if you want input or you want to work further with the project. Now, I don't think I've missed any significant groups, have I, Billy? But if I have, we apologize. We try to get everybody recognized today, and so you'll have a sense. It's important for you to know who's here because the audience is critical to making this effort take place. So at this time, I'd like to introduce to you Dr. Bob Templin from Thomas Nelson Community College, who will introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Harvey. I heard that the room next door just gave a belated applause. On behalf of Thomas Nelson Community College, and in fact the Virginia Community College system, and the system of higher education in Virginia, I want to welcome you here this morning to tell you you're a part of Virginia's greatest educational experiment that has been going on in the decade and will go on through the decade of the 90s. We're here today because there have been fundamental shifts in the nature of the world as it is today and that our children will be growing up in. There has been a change that requires the fundamental business of education itself to change. As Harvey indicated, and as Raymond indicated, at one point the purpose of education could be to disseminate what was known in the world at that time to prepare young people for life. That is, either to go to college or to go to work. To train them to be something that they would practice throughout life. But there's been a fundamental shift in the way that work is done in society. Due to the convergence of demography, technology, and a global economy, those functions of education no longer will do. A time when we could prepare people to go to work and end our work and have them stop being learners is long past. The time in which we could prepare people either to be lifelong learners or to be workers is a time that's past. The time when we could afford for only some of our students to be successful and the vast majority to be pretty good or unsuccessful is a time now past. I am very pleased this morning to introduce a man who is no stranger to the demands of rapidly changing technology and the need for a globally competitive workforce. George Perry was born in Brooklyn, New York, earned his degree in electrical engineering from the Pratt Institute, and among his career highlights include his affiliation with the Apollo Lunar Module Program. He served as the Quality and Reliability Engineer Manager with the Bendix Corporation, where he played a key role in the launch of the first major U.S. automotive application of electronic fuel injectors to high-volume production cars. In addition, Mr. Perry was the Vice President of Quality and Reliability for Allied Automotive for a global automotive operation, and chaired the council that established measures and objectives to assure continuous improvement to world-class levels of quality and productivity. Presently, Mr. Perry is the Vice President and General Manager of the Actuators and Fuel Systems Component Division of Siemens Automotive, with facilities in Newport News, but also in Pisa, Italy. He's responsible for the business strategy, product design, development and production of high-performance automotive products for global vehicle manufacturers. Now, if that weren't enough to have him communicate a message to us today, in addition to that, George, since his return to the peninsula in 1987, has been one of the area's leading business supporters of education at all levels. But especially for students who have not, for whatever reason, fulfilled their full potential in our schools. He believes in and acts upon the idea that it will take all of our people, not just managers and scientists and engineers, but all of our people to make American companies, and in fact to make America competitive. More than any other business leader I know, George Perry believes in the value of human resources as the best strategy and the one resource that will give companies and our communities the competitive edge in the 21st century. He has been a supporter from the outset of a white paper that was issued on the peninsula that identified the growing skills gap between the level of workers and the requirements of the workplace and the fundamental need for change in our schooling at all levels. He's been a financial supporter and a direct participant in the programs such as our Adams program, the Summer Regional Institute in Math and Science, the ATTACK 2000 program underway on the peninsula, summer internships for teachers and counselors. And he's active in these activities through the Virginia Peninsula Chamber of Commerce, the Economic Development Council, and currently this year chairs the Cooperating Hampton Roads Organization for Minorities in Engineering. It's with a great deal of pride and personal satisfaction that I introduce George Perry. George?
What a tremendous introduction. My mother must have written it for me. Well, let's see if we can handle this a little easier. The question of why are we here was already posed twice today, and it was answered in different ways, and I guess I want to try to answer it in another way. I think that we're here because the nation now recognizes that we have a crisis in education. It's become a critical issue to the government, to the country, as well as to the local governments. And I'm not happy with the product of our education system. I think personally that we still have a way of turning children off at a very early age and
not allowing them to realize the potential that they have in life. And I'm not happy with the education system because not only do we turn them off and maybe they end up scraping by and getting a high school diploma, but also they end up dropping out many times because we fail to tap the creative juices that they have, and we lean toward academic excellence as the sole measure of their worth in the schools. I'm not happy with the education system because many times the product of that system is unprepared for the workplace, and I'm a great example of that. I was telling a story to some of our young folks who are going to get involved in the Adams program for this year about my situation. I didn't have any role models when I grew up. I didn't know what I wanted to be. I just knew it was probably good to go to college. I could earn a little bit more money, and maybe make $200 a week like some of my uncles did. So I went to college. And I eventually ended up in electrical engineering. I only ended up in electrical engineering because my friends on the baseball team did. I had no idea what I wanted to do or what I wanted to be. I really had no guidance. I mean, I could be an architect, I could be an artist today, I could be anything. It's a happy accident that I took the right courses and was prepared enough that I could get by in electrical engineering. But it's also a happy accident that I never had to work as an electrical engineer in my life. And I'm not kidding. I would have been a dismal failure as an electrical engineer. I had absolutely no interest in electrical engineering. I happened to be good in math, so I could pass the courses and I could get by. But I was no more prepared when I went out into the workplace to be an electrical engineer than anyone that you might imagine. Fortunately, I was able to use other skills that I had. I got involved in the winter module program, and that required a lot more insight into logical thinking, creativeness, working well with people to get problems resolved, to focus on problems and issues, to not deal with blaming people or look for fault, but look for ways to improve. And that was an area that I apparently excelled at, and that is really what led my career to where it is. But I'm sure I'm not alone. I'm not the only person who graduated from engineering school thinking that I'm going to walk out there with, and I'll show my age, with my slide rule at my side and enter into this world of engineering and suddenly do magic. And I'm probably not the only person that got out there in the world of engineering and realized that that's not what it's like at all. Very little of what I did day in and day out through my education was really useful to me when I entered the workplace and became part of a real workforce that had a mission. So I'm not happy. But it's not only me that's not happy, and it's not only people like me that's not happy. Our current crisis is even more apparent when you make these kinds of comparisons. According to a recent Wall Street Journal study, it cost the U.S., on average, 30% more to educate a child from kindergarten to age 12 than it costs in Japan. A 1988 report compared the skills of 9th grade students in the U.S. with those of students in 15 other countries. The U.S. finished 13th. You read that the quality of education is seen through the eyes of the customer. And the customer, of course, the businesses that hire those people when they get out of school, is so bad that 90% of U.S. employers ignore diplomas, high school diplomas, believing that those graduates are no better off than dropouts. And 98% of U.S. employers never examine a high school transcript because they believe the courses are irrelevant to the needs of their business. It's no wonder that American businesses pay $210 billion a year for on-the-job training for their employees, plus an additional $30 billion a year to other institutions to provide training. That's the magnitude of the problem that we're facing. And if you read the papers, or even if you just buy products and are an observant consumer, you recognize that American business continues to lose ground to foreign competitors. Clearly, dumping money into it, spending more money to educate our children, is not the answer. And in those areas where we do have a lead, There are areas in technology and research where America still leads, but when you look at the demographics, and you realize that the people entering the workforce between now and the year 2000 and shortly beyond are a much higher percentage of today's underrepresented minorities in math, science, and technology, and females who typically haven't chosen those career paths, you see the magnitude of the problem, where we will even lose ground in those areas where we have a leadership position today. And that's how we get to this issue of global competitiveness. Whole industries have gone down the tubes in our country. I don't know if any of the people who are from our industrial companies here today were once working for those industries, but you can hardly go buy consumer electronics products without buying something that is not made in the U.S. And certainly the steel industry suffered dismally, and the auto industry, of which I'm a part, has been under attack from particularly Japanese competition for at least some 15 years now. And the loss of our manufacturing base, particularly manufacturing as important to our economy as the automotive industry, which is the largest manufacturing industry in the U.S., is critical to our national well-being and to our standard of living. The cracks are huge in our industrial base, and the number of unemployed workers are very large, and in fact, they're getting larger. Survival is clearly an issue for our manufacturing industries, and in our industry, my industry of automotive, clearly still an issue for the big three. Despite some of the successes that Ford Motor Company has had, they're really alone in those successes. General Motors and Chrysler, the once big three of the U.S., are suffering badly, and within the next couple of years will actually drop below 50% of production of the cars that are sold in the U.S., which is a pretty sad state of affairs. It gets tough to continue to call them the big three. But what happened here? What does all this mean? How does all this tie into education? There's a book out on the market now that's become very popular, certainly in the automotive industry, but in most industries where mass production has been the norm over the last couple of years. It's called The Machine That Changed the World. And when you really think about it, the education system is a mass production system also. We're not really dealing with specialty niche systems here when we talk about the big problem that we have. We are still leaders in higher education in many areas. In fact, many of the foreign students come study at U.S. universities. But for the general populace, for the masses, the education system is basically a mass production system. And I would urge everyone to read that book and get more insight into what has happened. And that will help get a better understanding of what's needed and what kind of solutions we should be looking at. But mass production, when it first became the norm in our industries and took the place of craft production of real specialists and craftsmen, carried with it so much in the way of productivity and allowed U.S. companies then to sell products all around the world and to dominate it. There was so much need for these products in underdeveloped countries at that time that we could live with the waste that was in the system. And in fact, the benefits of mass production brought with them an awful lot of side effects, which today we recognize as real weaknesses in mass production. And these are the things that led us down the path to the place that we are today. Many of today's ills really are related to the big move toward mass production, which was the start of the new industrial age, which was really hailed as something very, very important for our country. But actually, when you think about what happened, we started to require less and less skill of the average worker. We started to design jobs so that workers could just do mindless tasks, make it easy for a person to come in, and all they had to do was one thing, repetitive, day in and day out. In fact, it became known as a system where a person could park their brain at the door, punch a time clock. All they needed was the manual dexterity it took to do their particular job. They never were asked their opinion of anything, and no one ever wanted their opinion. And thus, the impetus for generating improvement at the lower level was lost. And the way companies were run, there wasn't a feeling that that was even needed. They thought that it would be much more fruitful and much more productive And by the standards they were measuring, it would be easier to have people just come in and do that same thing over and over and over again. So you wonder why businesses didn't really care whether people had a high school education or not. It didn't matter what good was a high school education if you were going to you're just going to get a worker in there and train them to do one repetitive task over and over again. And don't forget, the businesses are the customers of the school systems. They're the ones that use its products. So what I am getting at here is that we got in this problem together. There really isn't just a crisis in education. This crisis we have in business and this crisis that results from global competition is a crisis that we all created together as a partnership and that we need to get out of together as a partnership. We still had the need in those companies for the leaders to have education, but it was never recognized that all the people in the country needed a level of education to be able to contribute to their fullest extent. So what were some of the quick fixes when industries became under attack? No one then recognized the problem as we recognize it today. So we had a problem where we were trying to get the job down to something very repetitive. We could take the lowest level skilled person, and therefore it probably made more sense to pay them even lower wages because their task was so simple. And of course you had then, in the U.S. particularly, the rise of unions, and it had wages increasing through collective bargaining agreements. You had those opposing forces working, and it was easy when industry got in trouble to blame the cost of labor. I mean, I think in the auto industry probably we hit our peak when sometime in the early 70s, I visited a Ford Motor Company Mustang plant, and here was this guy sitting on a bench as Mustangs went by, tapping on little Mustang label, emblems. And that man was making $21 an hour to sit there and tap on Mustang emblems. So when industry got into this kind of problem, it was easy to say, well, I know what the cause of the problem is. We pay these people too much money to do this mindless task. And so what they started to do was to go offshore. Well, let's build our semiconductors, which is probably a classic example. Let's go to Manila in the Philippines. Let's go to Taiwan. Let's do our manufacturing offshore. Let's pay the lowest labor rate that we can pay to get this work done. That'll solve our problem. Well, unfortunately, it didn't solve the problem. And it didn't solve the problem for one very special reason that never was recognized at the time. And that is you've now divorced the manufacturing activity and the input, the database for all of the issues and problems that occur from the engineering and the design and development activity, which basically has to have a design that's producible, has to create a system that represents probably 85% of what it takes to build quality products right the first time and to make them better every year. And now the inputs from the production floor on the problems never could reach the people in Dallas, Texas, perhaps, or in Phoenix, Arizona. They were just divorced. So now that we've separated the two, we then basically defeated the continuous improvement process, which was absolutely necessary. And so that didn't work at all. And so then the next solution was, well, we're still the brightest people on earth. We have a tremendous number of advanced degree people. We'll use technology to solve the problem. So what did we do? We said, we'll automate. That's the easy solution. We don't need the worker at all then. All we have to do is fill our plants with robots and automation, and we solve the problem. And now we're back in the driver's seat, and we have competitive leadership once again. Well, General Motors is one company that tried that, and the story of their plant, their completely automated plant, is infamous in the automotive industry because that didn't work at all. They could never even get that automation off the ground. And automation itself is clearly not a solution. One of the things that we learned in this business is that technology crosses borders very quickly nowadays. You may have a short-term edge in technology, either in the design of a product or in the manufacturing of a product, but that's a short-lived edge. Technology will cross borders quickly. Your competitor eventually will be able to open up a plant right next door to you, hire the same people out of the education system that you have, put in the same level of automation, mimic your management practices, or you can mimic their management practices. Whatever it is, they can be doing the same thing as you are. So what does it come down to that really makes the difference between my company and my competitor's company? What is unique, and what can you sustain as unique? And the only thing that's unique is your people. The people that work for your company are unique. And you have to compare those people to the people that work to your competitor's company. So what it really comes down to is it's the workforce, it's the contributions that are made by all of the people, it's having an environment in your company that allows people to be able to make contributions to the maximum of their ability that eventually becomes the sustainable competitive advantage. So what I really think is that education really never lost its importance in this country. The customers, industry, really didn't demand it of the masses. That was the problem. Nothing has changed. Education has always been important. I'm sure that all of you as parents always say education is important for your children, just as my parents wanted me to get the best education that I could get. But since the customer is what always drives us in any of our businesses, the customer didn't require this level of education for the masses. That's been the primary reason, I believe, that our country has basically lost its competitive edge. Now, we in business clearly recognize the need. We have a survival problem, it's clear. And we know there are lots of things now that we have to do. We have to take action in order to help solve this problem and to regain our company's leadership and, in fact, our country's leadership. There are many, many programs that are beginning to take hold, and we recognize that some of the things that we have to do is to identify our customers' needs. We have to prepare a vision of what it is that we need to be like in order to satisfy those customer needs. And then we have to put in place all of the elements that it will take in order to achieve that vision. Now, there are short-term solutions that we need. There are long-term solutions, and the same thing is now happening in the education industry. We have to create a new environment in our companies, and I say we have to create a new environment in our schools, where we can overcome the resistance to change, which is dramatic in our companies, and I'm sure is dramatic in the school systems as well, which allows for failures, allows to run some experiments to see how it turns out, to modify it, which is not a system where we're going to be blaming people for failures, but we really need to find ways to recognize that this pilot program is not working and move on from there, and focus on the process, what we need to do to make the change effective, and not look for scapegoats when the changes aren't working out. But we have to create an environment in our workplace where people can succeed, where people can contribute to the maximum of their ability. The problem that we have, and this is why the business community now has come crying and complains about the lack of a world-class education system, is that we recognize we cannot make the necessary changes without an educated workforce. How can we move decisions down in an organization to people who don't have the ability or the skill to be able to make those decisions? We can do all the things we want with organization structure, and we can say, okay, we'll allow the worker at the machine to make these decisions. But if that person doesn't have the capability to make the decisions, we just can't abdicate the whole responsibility because the company goes down the tubes anyway. So now the education of the workforce has become a critical path for us. And that's why you hear business now talking so much about this crisis in education. And the government, of course, has to listen, and they recognize the impact on our economy and our country if we don't solve this problem. Now, there are many, many programs beginning to take hold, particularly on the peninsula. But even outside of this, there are consortiums, there are government-sponsored programs, there are state-sponsored programs, there are professional society-sponsored programs. I would say that the peninsula, with its programs and the partnerships that it's already built, is among the leaders. And I know that my company in particular, Siemens, being global and also having strong national presence, is involved in many of these programs. And I can say with some authority that the Peninsula is among the leaders with the vision it's created and some of the programs that it's established, and this program, Academic Tech, is no exception there. There's a large problem that still exists. All of the solutions that are being proposed today are the long-range solutions, and they are absolutely necessary. We have to start at the lowest level in the school systems. And there are programs that are starting at even lower levels than Academic Tech. And we have to build on those throughout the careers of these students. However, we also have a problem with the existing workforce. Because the problem for industry, the problem for someone like me, is that many of the people who will be working for my company in the year 2000 are already working for my company. And they are the products of an education system that did not require that the masses get the level of education that's needed for today's competitive companies. That's a real big problem. If you look at what happens when a transplant, which is what we call a foreign company that comes in and opens up a production facility on our shores, when a transplant comes on our shores and hires American workers, the screening process that they go through to pick only the best, to pick only the ones that are going to be able to accomplish their objectives, is something that we, with existing businesses, don't have the luxury of doing. So what are our options? One option is abandon the community and the existing workforce. And I'm sure that all of you have read about major companies that have had to do that, or they felt that they had to do that. Another option is to educate the existing workforce. Now that is an option that's a very expensive and time-consuming one, and unfortunately, many companies either don't have the time in the industry that they're in, or don't feel they have the time, or don't have the money, even if they do have the time, to support that kind of a program. That will definitely require partnerships between business, education, and government if we're going to keep our communities whole. The biggest problem that we face is that if companies like ours abandon these workers, and transplant companies don't pick these workers up because they're not qualified, they won't pass this kind of a screening process, what we basically will have is a larger unemployment level, and a lot of dissatisfied people, and a lot of communities with major problems because the workers are not capable of doing any of the jobs that people want, and they're really unwanted. And that's going to cause major social problems. So that problem is not one being addressed by Academic Tech, but it's a critical problem, I believe, for our business and our industry. And we definitely need more concerted effort on the part of government, industry, and educational institutions to recognize this and come up with creative ways to help get over the major hurdles that we face. Now, what does global competitiveness mean when applied to our school system? It means that you don't compare your school system against the schools in Northern Virginia. You don't compare your school system against the schools in Michigan or New York or California. You compare the school system against the product that's coming out of schools in Munich, Tokyo, in Seoul. That's what global competition means. I think the approach that we've taken in industry, which basically is to move toward total quality, try to achieve 100% satisfaction of your customer requirements through continuous improvement in everything you do, every fundamental part of your business, whether you're a service business or a manufacturing business or a school system, is the same approach now that we need to apply to the school systems and the education process. We need to apply a total quality approach. We need to know that the product that comes out of our school system is the right product for the market and the customer that it serves. And the customers are the businesses that employ these people. So business not only must be a driving force in helping shape that product, but clearly has a self-interest here in making sure that that product meets their needs and, of course, is the largest customer for that product. So what do we really need? What are we looking for as the output of this new system of education? What we need is workers who know enough to recognize quality and who have enough ability and confidence to be creative. People who are willing to take leadership, initiative when it makes sense, because they're trained to be self-starters, and people who are willing to concede leadership when it makes sense, because they recognize the value that others bring, and they are trained to be team players. It's amazing to me how many people think, gee, a tougher education system, why do we want to do that to our kids? Oh boy, you know, you're forcing kids to make really hard decisions on taking academic courses or languages at a very early age. Maybe we should put some of that off. In fact, I read an article only a week ago about some students in Hampton, I think, who were upset because they had to take language in this course by the 8th grade, and they thought maybe it should go to the 12th grade. That's wrong. 8th grade is probably still too late, as a matter of fact. I think as an American executive, the biggest issue that American executives face in terms of career growth and career opportunities with multinational companies is the fact that they don't speak a foreign language. In many cases, haven't ever been associated with the language and its culture, and you can't transplant an American executive like that into a leadership position on another continent and expect him to be successful. Whereas you can transplant a European executive in an American business environment and expect him to be successful because he's had a minimum of 9 years of English training, even if he hasn't had practice. And most of them have even had to practice. So at the executive level, even, this becomes a critical issue for career growth and career opportunities. But you know, when the children decide not to take these academic programs, or worse yet, when they decide to drop out, they're making career decisions that they're not prepared to make. And I think we have to force those kind of career decisions based on a much broader information base. We can't allow them to elect to drop out of school or not work up to their potential in school. Those fundamental changes, I think, we owe it to our children to make. Well, in summary, I was chairing the annual meeting of Chrome, and the Honorable Jim Dyke made a comment in his closing remarks, and he said to the Chrome students, "You're doing exactly the right thing." Well, I want to say that the program that you're a part of is exactly the right thing, particularly if you live up to its objectives of combining academic achievement with vocational competence that prepares people for careers and further education. Don't lose focus on the need for team orientation, because that's what's needed for success in the business environment today. The need for people who bring creative thinking skills as well as academic excellence. The need for consensus building, open-mindedness, people who value the contributions of others. So be sure that you don't lose focus on those kinds of skills and aptitudes that people need to be successful in business. And go back to the single-mindedness of academic excellence in a very narrow field to be considered a worthy or a top-level student. And remember, you have the business community's complete support. I urge you to take advantage of it. You're not alone in this. We're definitely in this together. And I think together we can bring this country back. Thank you.
Thank you very much, George. For those educators in the booth, just so you'll understand where we are in the lesson line here, what George has really done right now is just given us an extended set. He's tried to put us in perspective in terms of where we are and some of the challenges we have, and to maybe create some enthusiasm and some excitement, or at least some discomfort. You know, you have to have in your learners a level of discomfort, a need to know kind of a thing, and I think George has done that quite well. Billy Kennedy's going to come now as working together with co-chairing the executive committee, and he's going to come and give the explanation part of the lesson, because many of you are still sitting there saying, what is an academic tech? And for those of you who have not been part of this, or read the grant, or know anything about it, you know that you're here because someone has devised a concept called academic tech, but you're not sure what it is and what that has to do with you. And so Billy's going to try to come do that, and then after Billy gives you that explanation, We've got some platform guests who are going to really explain where they fit in and where the agencies that they represent fit into academic tech. And so we're not going to introduce each one of the persons that are platform guests, but if they would follow in the order of the program and come forward, we won't be bouncing up and down quite so much. So if you'll just follow Billy Candy, we'd appreciate it. Billy?
As a teacher, I still consider myself a teacher. I realized that after sitting for 45 minutes or so, that it's very easy for you to want to watch the inside of your eyelids. So before you watch them any longer, I'd like to just stand for just 10 seconds and open your eyelids. Okay, now close your eyelids as you begin to sink into your seats. I'd like to share with you very briefly the next 15 minutes or so why you're here, and I want to speak to the academic tech in a different way than what you have before you, because you have some information that you can read that will give you some other detailed kinds of things that you might be interested in. But you're here today because you have one very important, common, salient feature that makes all of us as one instead of individuals, and that is that we have very strong and powerful influence power. The people in this room influence young people's minds and dreams. We influence people's thoughts. We influence people's aspirations. When a youngster that's 4 years old comes to school, they don't come because they have a real need to know. They come because they see those people around them that make them feel that they're very important. Teachers, administrators. As they get older, they continue to look at those people that influence them in very specific ways. All of you are probably in this business because somebody in this business called education influenced you in some kind of way, and you never can leave it alone. Academic tech is designed in part to build on educators' influence power. Not the things that we have not done, but those things that we have done. And the impressions that we've made on young people, and as my boss says, the wiser group as well. Those people that have been around some time and realize that there is something you can learn from experience. So I'd like to talk to you about academic tech as really a regional effort. It's a curriculum effort designed to build on influence power, to do two things. One, to link learning to know with learning to do. And the other, to provide all students with greater leverage power in the marketplace. Again, to link learning to know with learning to do, and to provide youngsters with greater leverage power in the marketplace. Why in academic tech? George mentioned earlier today that there is a lot of competition in the world. The competition in the marketplace for an industry person is quite different in some cases than people that are in this business. But really, it's driven by the influence power of educators and making smart consumers. See, the reason why the consumer wants things of quality, wants things right away, and wants things at the best price is because we, through our influence power, have created smart consumers. We're not very tolerant of being able to go to a place and say, I'd like to have X item, and then the person say, well, can you come back in a week and I'll get it for you? Why? Educators have had a real positive influence power on teaching us and youngsters about being a smart consumer. So the competitiveness in the marketplace, we've influenced. And you may not have thought of it that way, but we have influenced what is driving the consumer, because we have helped to create those kinds of consumers. Again, why in academic tech? Mobility of work. At one time, when we came up through the system, it was clearly in our thinking and the thinking of our parents that the jobs of our parents and their parents would be our jobs. However, that's being threatened now because work now can be moved beyond boundaries. We're not competing with Hampton and Newport News and York County and Williamsburg and Pocosin. George talked about that. Because the work that we're talking about for our young people is not the work that's local and filled by local employees. Really, that work can be transported to where there are workers. So an academic tech is trying to, again, address the whole issue of making certain that our workers can also be mobile. Influence power in this business, we know, programs don't make things happen, people do. What happens in our business is not because of the program we have, but because of you. Why an academic tech? Skills of the workforce are changing. There has been a major shift, and Bob Templin talked about that. That shift does speak from having low and moderate levels of skill to jobs that in the future will require medium to high levels of skill. No longer can we afford to say that if you can't do it, you can always go work at. Not even McDonald's is too kind to our young people. Because now they hire the wiser group. Go to McDonald's and you see those wise ones at over 50 that have higher levels of skill. So again, the why of academic tech is to make certain that, again, our youngsters will have skills that are marketable and they can be mobile. So what is academic tech? You have a pass out, and I'd like you to look at that once you get back. But at this point in time, I'd like you to think of it in terms of two major things. One, it speaks to an applied academic emphasis. Creating a foundation of core academic skills that all youngsters will need, not some. We find out when you walk through the mall or when you talk to a niece or nephew or talk to those young people that come back to see you because of your influence power. And if you ask them a question, tell them how things are going. If you listen to what they say, but if you watch in their eyes with what they don't say, they'll tell you a whole lot about the importance of all kids having academic power. Because many times they communicate more with their eyes. That sparkle of dream that you influenced many years ago, you don't see there as well. That tone of voice that seemed to be uplifting when they came into your classroom or came into your building appears to be deafened somewhat. So again, academic tech is designed to try to create a foundation of academic skills for all youngsters, but helping them not only to learn stuff, as they refer to it, but learn how the stuff is applied. In the educational vernacular, we call it transfer, teaching for transfer. Kids don't understand teaching for transfer. What they understand is it doesn't have any meaning. As a young lady said to me the other day, I'm still trying to figure out how pre-calculus is going to help me. Not that it couldn't, but meaning. Some kids still try to figure out, I don't understand why fractions are so important. We understand it, but meaning. Some kids also don't understand why wellness is important. But as adults in the workplace, we understand how do you handle stress and still be able to make decisions. So academic tech is to try to teach a common core of skills to all youngsters, valuing each one of them as being very, very important. No youngster should be considered to be more important than another. And the other is to make certain we teach those common academic competencies in an applied mode so they have some meaning. Harvey said, many of you were here today not knowing why. If we didn't give you any meaning, you'd leave here saying, gosh, it's a waste of my time. And as adults, we say that and feel very comfortable in saying that. In many cases, we don't give kids that opportunity. We don't give kids the opportunity to say, why in the world do I feel like I need to know this? You told me I need to get through school, but why do I need to know it? George gave examples. I came into this business because I had the academic core skills, but the influence power of a person influenced me to make this decision. That I've never regretted. But the application of those core skills, I didn't begin to realize it until far later. Fortunately, the marketplace was kinder because it wasn't changing so quickly. So I could learn as I went along. Unfortunately, now the marketplace is not as kind. Why? Because of a group called the baby boomers. You know, those are the ones that want it right now. In the 60s, they were flower children. But the people who were born between 1946 or so and 1964, the largest group of consumers in the world, in this country, the largest group, we have more of us than others. And we have driven this whole issue about consumerism. So we don't want to allow people to take time to figure out to build a better car. I want George to have a car that that's going to meet my demands in quality and price. And right now, I don't want Georgetown to give me 5 years of development. Not going to be as kind. And we're not as kind. So again, that applied academic core is very important that we help our kids have an edge in the marketplace. Academic tech, another thing, is that it speaks to occupational clustering of courses. Think about it. A youngster going through school now, I can take a dibble of this and a dabble of that, and a little of this and a little of that, and it's nice. Makes you feel good all over. Those council people call it touchy-feely stuff. You know, just makes you feel good. But it's a short-lived touchy-feely feeling. Because when they leave us and they come back, we want that feeling to still be there. For your son or daughter, for your niece, your nephew, or friend, or one of those people you influence when they walk through your classroom or through the building. So the academic tech is designed to take those courses out there and put them together in some kind of fashion so that kids have leverage power. And leverage power means when you go into the workplace that you can do more than saying, trust me, give me a job and I'll learn it. Because most of the people in the workplace now will be in the workplace by the year 2000. Why? The baby boomers. We're going to still be around. And we are going to be competing with the young people who come out of school. So with that leverage power, these occupational clustering of courses, and in your program you see it. One is in business, you see it as a cluster. We have another one in the health area, it's another cluster. But those courses put together to try to give young people some basic competencies that give them leverage power. It also hopefully will give kids opportunity to have some career choices. Most of us in this room have probably had one real job, as kids talk about. And the one real job we had is this business. If you've had more than one real job where you work as a full-time employee, other than this, you're the exception to the rule in our business. Our youngsters most likely have 5 or 6 different jobs in their working lifetime. Academic tech is designed to get kids to put courses together in an occupational way to provide them with lots of choices that gives them leverage power so they can handle those 5 or 6 career changes. We know that the occupational clusters also are not the only solution. It's a start. It's a start to try to make certain that our young people have some kind of leverage power. And the way we see it happening is by taking those people that are in this room that have great influence power and helping us collectively to make some decisions about how we teach kids, what we teach kids, so that they have some choices. It's regional cooperation. I guess if IBM and Apple could sit down and talk in the same room and come up with an agreement, Hampton, Newport, New York County, Jamestown, Williamsburg, and Pocosi could probably do the same thing.